I don't know what they put in the water for 2024 horror movies, but is it just me or are we just getting like banger after banger? So today we're of course talking about The Substance, which I have been excited for ever since they announced it because it looked like a really cool, unique body horror. Then of course I got sick and I couldn't see it opening weekend, and all I saw was everyone talking about it and like how mind-blowing it was and how incredible it was, and I was just sick and I was like, oh man, I want to see that so bad. So I apologize this video is so late. I would have reviewed it sooner if I could have. So The Substance follows Elizabeth Sparkle, who is renowned for an aerobics show and faces a devastating blow on her 50th birthday as her boss fires her. Amid her distress, a laboratory offers her a substance which promises to transform her into an enhanced version of herself. So this is, of course, a body horror written and directed by Coralie Farge. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She also directed Revenge, which was another popular movie when it came out. So I think The Substance is a perfect balance of fun and horrifying. It's obviously a body horror, and I will say if you are sensitive to that, you cannot watch this movie. This is one of the most body horror movies I've ever seen. But it feels so unique. Like I could see some maybe inspirations, or you know, there were certain scenes that definitely reminded me of other movies, but I really felt like what Coralie did with this movie felt very unique for the genre, and like she did something different that we haven't seen before or haven't really seen in a while. And I'll talk more about which movies it kind of felt like and do some comparisons in spoilers, because obviously I need to talk a little bit about this ending of this movie because the last 30 minutes or so are wild, like everyone is saying. And I really enjoyed the viewing experience of this movie. It is 2 hours and 20 minutes. It did not feel like that for 1 second. Like it never felt like it dragged on at all, at least for me. I've seen some comments say that, but I just don't know how you could really think that, because this movie changes all the time. Every time there's like a shift that happens, it's even more mind-blowing, and then it goes even further and gets more intense, and it just like I'm just always so curious of what is going to happen next. It's like that constant anticipation and the suspense of what we're about to see on the screen. Like, how could they top that? How could they move from that? Like, where are they gonna go next if they've already gone there? I found Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, and Dennis Quaid to be perfect casting for this movie. I mean, Margaret Qualley and Demi Moore very much look alike, I think, and so I thought that was perfect casting for, you know, Margaret to play like the better version, I guess, of Elizabeth. Another thing that I really enjoyed about my viewing experience with this movie is how I felt every single emotion throughout this movie process. That's why it feels like such a unique movie, despite it feeling kind of inspired. It just was so interesting because you would feel anger at one point of how Elizabeth is treated, or how women in general are viewed by men specifically, and that pressure from society about aging and things. So you feel like this anger, but then that also leads to sadness. There are some, you know, tragic scenes in this movie that are very emotional, and those really hit for me personally. And then of course you have the disgust, the shock horror of what we're looking at, just like the body horror. And then there were even moments where I was laughing at this movie at either how ridiculous it was or just how weird the characters were. Like I thought some scenes were funny. So I just kind of went through like the whole Inside Out cast up in my head, like the whole spectrum of emotion while watching this movie, which I really enjoy when a horror movie specifically can foster those kind of emotions and not just horror or fear, or you can tell that they're not just catering to making your heart rate raise. You know, it's not just jump scares. It's a whole plethora of emotions going on here, and that really adds to the beauty of the story that is going on as well, not just the body horror. And I really wanted to emphasize that because I really enjoyed the kind of social commentary aspect of this movie and the backstory backstory and the character of Elizabeth Sparkle and her desperation, it really resonated with me personally. So I really, really enjoyed that aspect of this movie. Of course, a lot of people are going to take away just the disgusting body horror in this and like the shocking body horror, which of course this has. But I really wanted to underline the emotional aspect of the backstory of this movie. So not only did this movie have great commentary and just like a great portrayal and symbolism of aging and beauty and society's pressure and everything like that, but it was also beautifully shot. Okay, we need to talk about the cinematography and the color choices for this movie. It was a beautiful film. Did it lean a little bit more artistic than realistic? Definitely. It is more of an artsy style film. And I don't even mean that as like a negative. It's not a negative that this is more artistic. It all works together and really adds to the beauty of the movie. And I love that it's like juxtaposed with this horrific imagery. We're viewing this beautiful hallway with like this disturbing scene. Like, I just think it's really a cool balance. This whole movie is about balancing, I feel, fun and horrifying, beauty and disgusting, body horror. Like, I just loved all of it. And like, obviously the commentary with the horror as well, like it all just works together. So the surprising and shock factor of this movie isn't necessarily where the story goes, because I did find that each time, like as the story progressed, it became a little bit more predictable. Like you knew certain things were going to come back and storylines were going to be utilized, and you kind of saw like the direction that the story was going to go. But what was shocking about this movie and like the surprising nature was how far it chose to go, because I could not have anticipated it going to that level. So many times when interesting or like a climactic scene would happen, I'm like, oh, that's what everyone's talking about. And then the movie would just keep going. And I'm like, oh, that's what that has to be what people are talking about. And then it would go again and there'd be another scene. It's like, oh my God, that's what people are talking. Like it would just get more and more intense the longer the movie went on. And I was like, how are we going to top this? Like, where are we going from here? So the story wise, you kind of knew where it was going to pan out and like how things were going to take place, but you just didn't know what we're going to visually be seeing on the screen or like how far they were going to take things. All of the practical effects and the prosthetics used, again, this movie is a work of art. Like they deserve an award just for the prosthetics alone. This movie is so artistically done in such a beautiful way with such a great message that I love everything about this movie. You just have to go along for the ride, and the less you know about it before you watch it, the better, which is why I do not recommend watching the rest of this video, because I'm going to get into spoilers and talk about every intense scene that was in the movie. But again, if you don't like body horror and you're not going to watch it, feel free to watch the rest of the video and I will explain it to you. But you know, it will be disgusting. So just here's your warning. So let's get into spoilers. Firstly, this movie is inspired by The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And there are certain aspects of this movie that you can see in relation to that, with like the big picture of Elizabeth Sparkle and things. I personally have never read the book, so I don't know specifics, like even more than that, but it was kind of broken down on IMDb if you're curious. But that being said, it really reminded me, especially in the end, of The Thing by John Carpenter. Is one of my favorite horror movies of all time because of the practical effects and the prosthetics in that, where it's just iconic. And this movie does a lot of the same thing. It also feels very similar, like how Elizabeth transforms in the end, and obviously how Elizabeth and Sue morph together and become this thing. Very Thing inspired, it seemed. I don't know if it actually was, but it read a lot like Thing to me. And then also with the final scene, well, one of the final scenes, Carrie. It very much reminded me of like The Thing meets Carrie, which is, I think, a great description of this movie, at least for like the vibe of the ending of this movie. So let's talk about my favorite things about this movie that are all spoilers that I couldn't talk about before. Firstly, being birthed out of her back. That was genius. I haven't really seen that happen in this kind of body horror, because obviously we've seen body horror done before, and I just haven't seen a movie really do that, where the newly refreshed thing just is birthed out of the back. That was an intense scene, and to start there, I was like, I don't know where this movie is going to go, because that was already really intense. I loved the image of the eye splitting, where the new iris was in her eye, and then like the eye, like, it was so cool. The visuals in this, and like the way the concept was executed was so cool. It was fascinating. And then of course we know that Sue is going to want to be spending more time in her world than, you know, she is allowed to. So it's 7 days on, 7 days off. They switch every 7 days. So they each get to live in the world. However, Sue decides to take a little bit of stabilizing fluid out of Elizabeth's back, which I'm pretty sure was spinal fluid, which is foul. And that was, you know, very disgusting. So of course she's going to extend her time. And the first time she does it, it takes life or beauty. I don't really know, but, you know, it takes the life out of Elizabeth's when she finally, you know, when they finally transfer and Elizabeth wakes up and her finger is rotting because she extended the time. One thing I was kind of left confused by is if they shared a true like consciousness, because they would wake up and be surprised at the other's actions. And I thought possibly they had like some shared consciousness and then some not. So I wasn't 100% sure how it worked, but I just had suspension of disbelief. It's like, sure, whatever. They have two different brains maybe that kind of work as one sometimes. So that'd be my only criticism, is that wasn't necessarily always clear to me if they shared a consciousness or not. Anyway, but this scene where she extends it for a night really sets up the idea perfectly, because you know that's going to come back. You know, as soon as she's offered the hosting gig for the New Year's Eve party, that is where things are going to go down. You know, she's about to extend in order to do that. And then she ends up extending for 3 whole months, which is just a wild concept, because you don't actually see Elizabeth in the other room. You just see Sue walking in there to get more spinal fluid. I was just blown away by that concept, because that's so disturbing to think about, because then you're like, what is Elizabeth going to look like right now? Like, is she just going to be like an old woman? I thought it was going to go like the route of Pearl in X, where it was Mia Goth and a lot of prosthetics to make her look old. I thought it was going to be like that. No. She was way worse than I could have ever imagined. I don't even think that they exploited old people for the sake of shock horror like some movies do, like they kind of did in X. I feel like they did it in a way that was clearly she's transforming into like a monster, you know? She's deformed because of Sue using her spinal fluid until infection, and there's just like this infection rotting her body, and of course time being taken away from her, and just her bones, the knee scene with the leg. There were so many scenes. That scene, the chicken scene. So then Elizabeth, of course, decides to terminate, and we also knew this was going to go that route, because she calls to end it, but then she decides last second, no, I'm not actually going to do that. But then, you know, of course, she does eventually get the termination kit. She puts like half of the fluid into Sue's heart. Somehow this wakes her up, and they're both awake. And then again, I knew that there was going to be some time where they would probably battle each other, and that is exactly what happened. Again, I didn't think it would be that intense with like the mirror and the face, you know? That was a lot. Anything with like head, you know? That really gets to me. And so that is the scene where I was like, oh, that's what everyone's talking about. Like, that's a cool fight scene. It's kind of intense with the face. And then obviously Elizabeth is like this deformed thing. So that was weird. But then it just gets even more weird. It just keeps going. It gets even more intense. And Sue shows up to the New Year's Eve party to host, and her teeth fall out. Actually, she pulls her teeth out. And I feel like everyone collectively in the theater is like, please don't. Can you just stop doing that? Can you stop pulling your teeth out? That would be great. Her nails coming off. You know, they're just putting every kind of body horror into this movie, man. Needles also, if you're afraid of needles at all. this isn't going to be your movie. So while she's desperate, you know, she's falling apart basically because she ran out of stabilizer fluid. Elizabeth is now dead and she has nothing to restore her and her body is shutting down. So she goes back home, which again, timeline wise, I feel like she had no time to do that, but sure, you know, again, suspension of disbelief, sure, she shows up on time later. Not sure about the timeline there, but anyway, she goes back home, injects the activator. Again, she still has the activator. And this, of course, transforms her into a mutated version of Sue and Elizabeth. Elizabeth pops up again. Hey, girl. Just on the back. I will never get that image out of my head, I think, of this transformed being. And she still wants to feel beautiful. She puts her dress back on. And she shows up to the New Year's party to host. You know, she births a boob. Yeah, that happens. And then the scene of her drenching the audience in the blood, it just felt very Carrie, you know? And I thought that was really iconic for Coralie to do that in the end. I loved that scene with the music. It was so intense and your jaw's on the floor. Like, what am I even watching right now? Like, if anybody were to come in not knowing this movie at all, would be like, what is that? And then I really like the full circle ending of Elizabeth detaching from this thing and, you know, ending up on her star and just decomposing onto her star and just, you know, looking up at the palm trees and just feeling content. I feel like she was content in that moment, and I really liked that full circle moment. And it also really reminded us that one day we're here and then we're not, you know? She just like kind of disintegrated, they cleaned her up, and then she was gone, and her star was just walked on and she was forgotten. And I feel like that's just a great ending message for this movie. No matter how beautiful you are, how society portrays or sees you or whatever, we all get to that stage of life where we all die, you know? And we all get old, regardless of how much work you do or if you inject an activator or not. We're all gonna get there. We're all gonna get there in the end. And I liked that Sue seemed perfect, but she was not immune to becoming a monster. But Sue was not immune, and, you know, it's coming for us all. Age and death and all of it. It's just, I really liked that pointed message in the end, and it really worked for me, and I thought it was a great way to end this movie. So this movie just had everything that it really needed to work as a story, commentary, horror, as a horror movie alone. Like, obviously it was effective. So I just really loved everything about this movie. I thought it was beautiful, so well done, so beautifully done, artistic, stunning. Everything about it was great. I would love to hear your thoughts, of course, on The Substance if you've seen it. Leave your comments down below. I hope you enjoyed my review, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye.